At my retirement party, my daughter-in-law spiked my drink, and in the end, it was her own mother who died. People call it a tragedy. I call it mathematics. I'm Victoria Hayes, 65 years old, a dark-skinned American businesswoman. 40 years in the tech world have taught me that no success comes without a price, and no smile is ever completely innocent. I had just sold the company I built from the ground up for $30 million, a clean round number, enough to retire with my head held high and my heart at ease. Or at least that's what I believed until that night. Malibu shimmered under the sunset, the sea tapping gently against the rocks below my cliffside home. Above my house glowed with hundreds of golden lights reflecting off the glass walls like liquid gold. My retirement party, the farewell to my life in business, was in full swing. Guests filled the room, laughter echoed, crystal glasses chimed together, and the scent of expensive perfume mixed with the chill of champagne in the air. I stood at the center of it all, wrapped in a bronze silk gown that caught the light. In my hand, a glass of champagne glistened. As I looked around, I saw familiar faces, old colleagues, lifelong friends, and my family. My son Ethan, his wife Madison, and her mother Carol. The three of them sat together, a perfect family portrait, the kind every photographer hopes to capture. But I've lived long enough to know nothing perfect ever stays that way. Madison's gaze met mine from across the room. She smiled, a wide, dazzling smile that was far too rehearsed. Her brown eyes, framed by heavy mascara, held a glint of something cold. She was the kind of woman men fall for easily, and women like me never trust. I knew her type. Beautiful, ambitious, dangerously clever. I had hired, fired, and outplayed women like her all my life. I recognized that look instantly. Ethan, on the other hand, was good, too good, the kind of good that blinds you. He had his father's kindness, and I loved that about him, but kindness can be a dangerous weakness. I had warned him gently once not to hand over too much control in marriage, but he just laughed, saying I was being paranoid. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd learned to see danger even where there wasn't any. But as always, I was right. The evening glowed warmly, the music soft and golden. Old friends toasted to my legacy, recalling the days when I fought tooth and nail for every contract. I smiled, trading jokes and stories, playing the gracious host. At 65, I'd mastered the art of commanding a room without raising my voice. That kind of power comes only with time. Yet beneath all that laughter, I felt something off, a current of unease slipping under the surface like cold air through a window. Madison's eyes were wrong. Every time I looked away, I felt her watching me, not with affection, but with calculation. When I finally caught her gaze, she smiled sweetly, then leaned toward her mother to whisper something. I took a small sip of champagne, the crisp taste cutting through the warmth of the room. The sound of the party blurred for a moment, and I realized I was living in a world where everything, trust included, had a price tag. Ethan came over, his face glowing. "Mom, you look amazing tonight. Everyone says you look 10 years younger." I laughed, setting my hand on his shoulder. 15 if you say that again in front of the guests. He laughed, hugged me, then went back to Madison, kissing her forehead tenderly. I watched them, my heart torn between love and unease. Outside, the ocean kept its steady rhythm. Everything seemed peaceful, too peaceful. I stepped out onto the balcony, breathing in the salt air. The sea wind tangled through my hair, bringing the scent of memory. I had fought all my life, built an empire from nothing, survived losses, betrayals, loneliness. But one thing I never lost was instinct. I didn't survive in a man's world by luck, I told myself, staring through the glass into the party inside. I survived by seeing the hit before it landed. I returned to the crowd, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Madison stood at the bar, pouring drinks, laughing with Carol. As I approached, she turned her smile still in place, but her hands froze for a fraction of a second. It was brief, but enough. You don't negotiate million-dollar deals for decades and miss a tell like that. I lifted my glass, watching her closely. Madison's gaze dropped to my drink, then back to my face, measuring me. A flicker of instinct sliced through me like a blade. I couldn't explain why, but every cell in my body warned me something was about to happen, and it had everything to do with me. I set the glass down, hiding my suspicion behind a calm smile. Madison moved closer, resting her manicured hand on my shoulder. Her voice was soft, too soft. "You've worked hard, Mom. It's time for you to really rest." Her words were smooth, but they carried the faintest vibration of control. I looked at her without replying. In that moment, I caught the flicker of light from a nearby candelabra reflecting off the silver tray in the waiter's hands. Her image appeared in that reflection, warped, doubled, ghostly. I didn't know what it meant yet, but my gut tightened. Tonight was not just a celebration. Something was shifting beneath the surface. Sometimes fate sends warnings in small, quiet ways. The question is whether you're wise enough to notice them. I raised my glass once more, eyes locked on Madison's. The air in the room thickened, as if time itself was holding its breath. I understood something then. Survival isn't about strength, it's about silence. The music continued, laughter rippled through the guests, but for me, every sound grew distant. All I could hear was my heartbeat, steady and deliberate, counting down to something unseen. I kept smiling, the perfect picture of a woman content with her triumph, but deep down, I knew something had already begun. And once that wheel starts turning, it never stops until someone pays the price. Madison, my daughter-in-law, is the kind of woman any man would want by his side at a glamorous party like tonight. She's young, beautiful, her golden hair cascading down her shoulders, her smile soft enough to make a room go silent when she walks by. Madison knows exactly what to say, when to laugh, how to make others feel seen. Everything she does is flawless, so flawless it doesn't feel real. To everyone else, she's the perfect daughter-in-law. To me, she's a woman who knows how to smile with her lips, not with her heart. I've met many women like Madison. They survive on appearances that have been carefully designed. They make the world believe their sweetness is natural, but it's nothing more than a tool. Every glance, every word, every tilt of the head is calculated. For them, love is a velvet trap, and trust is the richest prey. I never wanted to hate Madison. When Ethan first brought her home, I tried to open my heart. She held his hand, eyes shining as if she could already see her future there. But within minutes, I realized she wasn't talking about Ethan. She was talking about us, about what we'll do, where we'll invest, how we'll grow. Not love, strategy. Ethan, my son, is everything I once hoped a man could be. Kind, gentle, honest. But that's what makes him so easy to hunt. He sees the world through eyes too clear to notice when someone's wearing a mask. I'd heard whispers from a few old friends that Madison was pressuring Ethan to move his inheritance forward. One afternoon at my office, I received a message from a former colleague, once our family lawyer. He wrote, "You might want to double-check your authorization papers. Someone seems to be planning for the future a little early." I didn't have to ask who. I've learned one thing after decades in business. When someone's eager for your retirement, it's rarely because they care about your health. I began watching Madison more closely. Not openly, just from a quiet distance. She liked being in the kitchen, not to cook, but to control who entered, who spoke, and what was said. When guests arrived, she was the first to greet them, the first to pour a drink, and the last to toast. I never told Ethan what I'd heard. He wouldn't have believed me. To him, Madison was the angel who had lifted him from his loneliness after his father's death. I couldn't blame him. When people love, logic is the first thing they sacrifice. I know that. I've done it too, and I've paid for it. Women like Madison don't kill with knives, they kill with patience. I said that to an old friend months ago when she asked why I didn't hire a private investigator to follow my daughter-in-law. I didn't need to. Madison was too smart to act impulsively. She would wait until I was weak. Wait until Ethan belonged entirely to her. Wait until everything I built existed only on paper. And when that time came, she would strike. No knives, no guns, no blood. Just a smile, a handshake, and everything would belong to her. I knew it, but I couldn't stop it. I could only wait to see when she'd make her move and how. In business, the smartest player isn't the one who attacks first, but the one who knows when to stand still. I still remember the first time Madison made me realize exactly who I was dealing with. It was my birthday. She gave me a silk Hermes scarf, deep blue, the exact color I love. When I asked how she knew, she smiled. I looked at some old photos of you. You always wore that color, I guessed. Her answer was light as air, but it revealed precision. I don't like people who know too much about me. She never does anything without purpose. Ethan doesn't see it. He's proud of her, calls her a modern woman, strong and independent. I smile and say nothing. I don't want to push him away, but I start paying attention to every glance Madison gives my belongings, to every casual question about my finances, to every word she thinks I don't hear. She starts getting involved in family affairs, suggesting new accountants, asking about the management of my trust funds, proposing fresh investments. Always polite, always reasonable, always subtle. But I know what she's really saying. It's time for you to step aside. She's testing me softly, patiently, seeing where I'm weak, how far she can push before I push back. Sometimes, when it's just the two of us, she says things that sound caring. You should travel more, Mother. Life's short. Or, you should let Ethan help out. He worries about you. Every word wrapped in kindness, but layered with meaning. I always answer with the same smile. When I'm tired, I'll rest. She smiles back, nods, and pours me another glass of wine. I realize then Madison doesn't just want my money. She wants victory. She wants to prove she can take everything, even the last ounce of pride I have left. I've seen that look before in boardrooms during negotiations, the gleam of someone who knows they're about to win. Cold, radiant, intoxicating. And now I see it again in the eyes of my daughter-in-law. I can't bring myself to hate her. A part of me, the part forged by decades in war rooms and deals, finds her fascinating. Madison is a reflection of me, only reversed. I built. She plots to steal. This isn't a fight between generations anymore. It's a duel between two women who understand that true power doesn't come from age, but from reading the opponent's move before they make it. So I prepare, not by fighting back, but by observing, memorizing, waiting, because I know Madison won't wait forever. One day she will make her move, and when that moment comes, I'll be there ready, with a cold glass of champagne in my hand and the calm gaze of a woman who's already seen the first strike before it lands. The night in Malibu was windless, the sky bathed in the soft light of a late sunset reflecting off the long glass panels of the dining hall. The house shimmered with laughter, jazz music drifted through hidden speakers, and the scent of chilled champagne floated in the air like a thin veil of perfume. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the world I had built and conquered, yet tonight it felt distant, like a lacquer painting beginning to crack, where only I could hear the faint splitting sound. Madison moved toward me, cloaked in a warmth so carefully performed that it would have touched anyone watching. She poured my drink, her tone tender, almost reverent. "You should relax, Mother. Tonight is yours." "Ethan and I will take care of everything," she said softly, eyes glinting with sweetness, her smile flawless. I nodded, letting her believe I trusted her completely. But my focus was elsewhere, not on her words or smile, but on her hands, a small, deliberate motion, subtle but unmistakable. As she poured champagne from the Moet bottle into my glass, her thumb hesitated just for a second, as though releasing something tiny, something meant to disappear unnoticed. I didn't look directly at her. I looked at the reflection in the silver serving tray beside us. The candlelight distorted the image, but not enough to hide it. A small, pale object, round, dissolving fast into the fizz. My heartbeat slowed by a single heavy beat. In that instant, every suspicion I'd ever had, every whisper I'd overheard, every quiet fear I'd pushed aside, fell into place like puzzle pieces snapping together. Madison had made her move. I remained still. No gasp, no trembling hand, no sign that I'd seen. I'd survived boardrooms filled with smiling assassins. I'd seen betrayal wrapped in handshakes, but never had the predator shared my family name. If you see someone burying a mine, let them take one more step. The thought echoed in my head, an old rule I'd lived by for decades. Once again, it was right. Madison chatted with friends, occasionally glancing back at me, unaware that one careless second had given her away. She believed her plan was flawless, that the pill would dissolve completely before anyone noticed. She believed I would drink it, happy, distracted, defenseless. I lifted the glass, turning it gently under the light. The champagne's surface looked slightly cloudy, the bubbles duller than usual. A trivial detail to anyone else, but I was not anyone else. I was Victoria Hayes, the woman who'd survived 40 years surrounded by smiling predators. I knew what I was looking at. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter. Glasses clanked, heels tapped on the wooden floor. I smiled, exchanged a few polite words, while my mind moved with precision. I had to act without revealing myself. Madison couldn't know that I'd seen. She had to believe the game was still hers. My eyes found her mother, Carol, standing across the room in a satin pink gown, laughing too loudly. The resemblance between the two women was striking. The same practiced charm, the same hunger for approval. But Carol lacked Madison's finesse. She was clumsy, vain, desperate to be noticed. I took a slow sip of champagne, letting the chill bite at my tongue before setting the glass down. Madison turned back to me, voice smooth as silk. "Would you like some more, Mother?" "Thank you," I replied evenly. "This is enough." She smiled, reassured, then turned away. She had no idea I'd seen everything. I watched the flicker of candlelight dance across the hundreds of glasses around the room, each one a tiny mirror catching fragments of faces, gestures, secrets. It struck me then, sometimes the most dangerous games are played in the brightest rooms. I wasn't afraid. Oddly enough, I felt calm. Perhaps it was because I'd already met death before, in business collapses, betrayals, the slow decay of a marriage. Death had many faces, and none surprised me anymore. But to be killed by your own daughter-in-law at your own celebration, that was a plot twist I hadn't expected. Madison came back, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Are you happy, Mother? Everyone's here for you." Her eyes glowed with warmth too perfect to be real. She turned toward Carol and gave a brief knowing glance. A signal. Carol nodded almost imperceptibly. I smiled, the kind of smile you give when you know a secret no one else does. I'm very happy, I said softly. It's a wonderful night. In my head, every move after this one was clear. I couldn't confront her yet. If I did, she'd retreat, cover her tracks, and I'd lose the upper hand. No, I needed her to believe I'd already fallen into her trap. I looked once more at the glass. The candlelight shimmered across the liquid. Madison laughed at something Ethan said. Carol threw her head back in another loud burst of laughter. The whole room seemed to slow, every sound stretching thin, every detail sharpening. My fingers brushed the glass. It was cold enough to sting. And then it hit me. This is the first strike, and I won't be the one it hits. I inhaled deeply, smiled faintly, and began to move through the crowd. I raised my glass, clinking it gently with a few guests maneuvering subtly toward the table where Carol stood. As I passed Madison, her eyes met mine. Something flickered there. Tension, suspicion, but vanished as quickly as it came. I said nothing. I only smiled, the smile of someone who knows she's been chosen as prey and has already decided how the hunt will end. The room blazed with golden light, laughter echoing against the marble walls. But inside my mind, the shadows were gathering, deliberate and patient. I didn't know exactly what would happen next, only that someone was about to take one more step. And I was the only one who knew the path led nowhere near victory. Laughter filled the room, mingling with the gentle clinking of glasses and the smooth rhythm of jazz swelling through the speakers. The warm amber light shimmered off the champagne flutes, casting a soft glow across the guests' faces. Ethan stepped forward, holding the microphone, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Tonight is the most special night of my mother's life," he said, his tone full of pride. "She's not just my mom, she's my hero. The woman who taught me that nothing is impossible if you stay determined." Applause erupted across the room. I smiled faintly, tilting my head toward him. I loved my son deeply, too deeply perhaps, and as I looked at his radiant face, I felt that familiar ache in my chest. If I died tonight, he would never know it wasn't an accident. He would believe it was fate, not murder, and he would keep loving the woman standing beside him. That thought sent a chill through me, but I kept my expression calm. I turned my gaze toward Madison. She stood next to Ethan, one hand resting on his arm, the other holding her glass of champagne. Her smile was serene and flawless, her movements graceful, rehearsed. Her eyes flicked toward me, glinting with something sharp. Satisfaction, maybe? The satisfaction of someone who believed the game was already won. A waiter passed by, carrying a tray of freshly poured champagne. I noticed Carol's glass sitting right beside mine, bubbles rising evenly to the surface, the same pale gold shade, indistinguishable from the others. I looked back at Madison, and when our eyes met, she smiled. That smile said everything. "Drink it, mother." In that instant, time slowed. The music faded to a distant hum, and I could hear the faint fizz of the champagne. I saw the beads of condensation roll down the glass, felt the cool stem between my fingers. My heartbeat steadied, not from fear, but from focus, the kind of calm that comes right before a decisive move. When Ethan proposes the toast, I told myself that will be the moment I decide who lives and who doesn't. Ethan raised his glass high. "To my mother, Victoria Hayes, the strongest woman I've ever known." Everyone lifted their glasses. I mirrored them, my hands steady, my eyes on Madison. She raised her glass too, lips curving into that confident smile again. As the waiter brushed past, his tray wobbled slightly from a passing guest. It was barely noticeable, barely, but it was enough. I shifted my glass. Smooth, effortless, natural. My champagne for Carol's. No one noticed. When I turned back the glass I now held shimmered clean under the light, pure untouched. And across the room, Carol held the one meant for me. She laughed, oblivious, the bubbles catching the light as she lifted it toward her lips. Madison still hadn't realized. Her eyes lingered on me, full of quiet triumph. I saw in them the same expression I'd seen 1,000 times in boardrooms, the look of someone who believed they had already won. I had once worn that look myself. Not tonight. Madison lifted her glass. Her lips parted and she whispered, "For family." I raised mine, locking eyes with her, then glanced toward Carol. At my retirement party, my daughter-in-law spiked my drink, and her own mother ended up poisoned. A smile ghosted across my lips. I don't need to scream to survive, I thought. I just need to switch glasses. Silence, brief but absolute, before the sound of glass meeting glass rippled through the room. Cheers echoed in unison. I took a delicate sip, letting the cold champagne glide across my tongue. Sweet, crisp, faintly citrus. I swallowed, my eyes still fixed on Madison. She drank too small and slow, watching me for a reaction. She was waiting for panic, for weakness, for me to fall. But I didn't. I stood there composed, smiling back. The faintest flicker crossed her eyes, the smallest fracture in her confidence. Her grip on the glass tightened. Carol laughed loudly, setting her glass down, launching into a story about the first time we met. I nodded politely, pretending to listen, my gaze never leaving her. She had no idea that every breath she took now was borrowed time. Madison looked between us, uneasy, sensing something she couldn't name. I could see the doubt bloom behind her eyes, but it was too late. The air in the room felt thick, electric. The music kept playing, but everything seemed muted. My pulse was steady. My thoughts were sharp, deliberate. I was ready. Ethan turned toward me, smiling, radiant, still clueless. My heart tightened again, knowing that whatever happened next would change him forever. I memorized his face in that moment, the innocence of it, because I knew innocence never lasts long. Carol's laughter faltered. Her hand went to her chest. The glass slipped from her grasp, shattering on the floor. Champagne spread across the hardwood in a pool of gold. She gasped, convulsed, her mouth opening soundlessly for air. Screams erupted. Madison dropped her glass and rushed to her mother. I didn't move. I stood still, bathed in the glow of the chandelier, watching the scene unfold. The room was chaos, but my mind was silent. I turned away, walking slowly toward the window. My glass, still half full, caught the light and painted golden ripples across my skin. Inside my head, a single thought rang clear, cold as steel. In a room full of people, I'm the only one who knows who just won and who just lost. And I, Victoria Hayes, 65 years old, the woman everyone thought was finished, had just made the coldest move of my life. The sound in the room seemed to shatter and then contract in a single suspended moment when the sharp ting of glasses clinking rang out. The note lingered, echoing beneath the crystal lights, mingling with the distant crash of Malibu waves. Everyone lifted their glasses, laughing, celebrating. It was a perfect moment, almost too perfect. I stood there holding my champagne flute, my eyes fixed on Madison. She drank slowly, taking small sips, her face calm, but her eyes betrayed her. I could see the anticipation behind those brown irises, the shallow rhythm of her breathing, the flicker of satisfaction. Madison thought everything was unfolding exactly as planned, that within minutes I would sway, collapse, and chaos would follow. She didn't know that fate had quietly changed hands with a simple movement of my wrist. I stayed silent. My glass touched my lips, just a faint sip, enough to moisten my throat. I smiled. That smile made Madison hesitate for half a second, an instinctive reaction from someone who feels something is off. Then she forced a smile, turned to chat with other guests, pretending nothing had happened. I watched Carol. She was in the middle of a story, laughing too loudly, gesturing with her hands. Then, in an instant, I saw it, the change. Her eyelids fluttered, her breath caught, her fingers trembled as she set the glass down. Time froze. Her hand slipped from the table's edge. The glass fell, shattering into a glittering spray across the hardwood floor. The golden liquid spilled, catching the light like molten metal. Gasps echoed. Carol's body folded forward, her hands clutching her chest, her face twisted in pain, mouth gaping for air, but finding none. The first scream pierced the air. Oh my God, what's happening to her? Carol convulsed, collapsing to the ground, foam spilling from her mouth. Screams filled the room. Chairs toppled, glasses shattered. The air turned thick with panic. Waiters rushed over, guests backed away, someone shouted for a doctor. Madison threw her glass aside and dropped to her knees beside her mother. "Mom, Mom, please," she screamed, voice cracking. "Somebody, call an ambulance, hurry." I stood still amid the chaos, calm as a statue. Everything was happening exactly as I'd seen it in my mind. I lifted my phone, dialed 911, and spoke in a steady voice. "There's a woman unconscious at a private event, 1874 Broad Beach Road, Malibu. She's seizing, possibly poisoned. It's not because I'm cruel, it's because I saw this happen in my head before it ever did." Madison clutched her mother, her sobs breaking through the panic, her tears dripping onto the floor beside the shattered glass. The paramedics hadn't even arrived, and already the air smelled of fear and spilled wine. Ethan ran toward her, his face pale, eyes wild. "What's happening? What's going on?" I ended the call, setting the phone on the table. My eyes moved slowly across the room. I stepped closer, knelt beside Madison, and placed a hand on her shoulder. Her skin was cold. Madison looked up at me, her eyes wide, trembling. For a second, she seemed like a lost child, desperate to understand what went wrong. "You need to breathe, Madison," I whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. "Help is coming." Her lips quivered. "Why? Why is this happening?" I didn't answer. I only looked at her deep into those frightened eyes, eyes that once sparkled with calculation. The truth was dawning inside her, spreading like poison, and I could see it written all over her face. Guests stood frozen in disbelief. Someone turned off the music. The silence was deafening, except for the sound of waves and labored breathing. Ethan pressed his hands on Carol's chest, performing CPR, his voice shaking as he called her name. But I knew there was no coming back. I stood, straightened my dress. People were calling my name, asking if I was all right, if I needed to sit. I nodded faintly, keeping my tone even. "The ambulance is on its way. Please, everyone, give them space." Madison's cries grew weaker, breaking into hiccups. "Mom, Mom, please don't leave me." I looked down at her, and for a fleeting second, I almost pitied her. If life was a chessboard, she had just pushed her own queen into the line of fire. A memory surfaced, a mentor from decades ago, a man who'd once told me, "Victoria, in every game, being one step slower means you've already lost." I had lived by that truth, and tonight it had saved my life. I exhaled softly, not out of relief, but out of understanding the game was over. There was no need to speak, no need to act further. Everything had been set in motion. Ethan turned to me, voice shaking. "Mom, what's happening? Why is this?" I cut him off gently. "Let the doctors handle it. Everything will become clear soon." I walked away slowly, the golden light from the chandeliers tracing the hem of my dress. My heartbeat was steady, deliberate. I felt no fear, no guilt, only the chill that comes from realizing you've just stepped away from death untouched. Outside, the wail of sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed across the glass walls, painting the room in chaos. Paramedics rushed in, rolling a stretcher. The smell of metal and spilled alcohol mixed in the air. Madison was helped to her feet, her face ghostly white, her eyes hollow. She no longer screamed. She just whispered again and again, "This can't be real. This can't be happening." I stepped beside her once more, resting my hand lightly on her arm. My voice was calm, almost tender. "You should breathe, Madison. There's still a lot ahead of you." She stared at me, and for the briefest moment, I saw my reflection in her eyes, a woman who wasn't afraid, who wasn't angry, who was simply awake. It's not because I'm cruel, I thought, but because I saw this happen in my head before it ever did. Outside, the ocean kept its rhythm, the waves striking the rocks with perfect indifference. Inside, surrounded by silence and broken glass, I knew the battle was over, and only one of us was left standing. The police arrived faster than I expected. Red and blue lights flickered outside, slicing through the glass and washing over the pale faces inside the dining hall. The crackle of their radios broke the heavy silence, boots scraping against marble floors. The music had stopped long ago, leaving only the sound of shallow breaths and the soft hiss of the ocean wind slipping through the curtains. Madison knelt beside her mother's body, mascara bleeding down her cheeks in black streaks. She was trembling, her voice cracking between sobs. Maybe she was allergic, or someone switched the glasses. The words shattered in the air, fragile and desperate. The smell of champagne mixed with fear hung thick in the room. A young officer stepped forward, firm and composed. "Everyone, please stay where you are. We need to secure the scene." His gaze swept across the overturned glasses, then settled on Madison. "You said the glasses were switched. What do you mean by that?" Madison wiped her tears, her eyes wide with panic. "I don't know. Maybe the waiter mixed them up. I swear I didn't do anything. I don't know what happened." She looked around the room, searching for sympathy. That wasn't there. Ethan stood frozen at the edge of the chaos, his face drained of color. I watched her quietly for a long moment before speaking, my voice calm, deliberate. "The waiter," I set my glass down gently, the crystal ringing faintly against the table. "Madison, perhaps, you've forgotten something." She looked up, her voice shaking. "Forgotten what, Mother?" I smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that could be mistaken for compassion, but wasn't. "I think the cameras in the dining room will help clear things up." The room froze. Silence pressed down like a weight. Every head turned first toward me, then toward Madison. Somewhere in the distance, a silver spoon clattered to the floor, its sharp echo cutting through the tension like a verdict. Madison took a half step back. "Cameras? You mean there are cameras?" Her voice broke, trembling with disbelief. I didn't answer. Instead, I gave a subtle nod to the lead officer. He caught my meaning instantly and motioned for his team to check. I leaned back slightly, one hand resting on my glass, watching Madison like a player studying a finished chessboard. The silence grew heavier, suffocating. The energy in the room had shifted, no longer chaos, but the cold stillness that follows when a predator realizes she's been cornered. Madison looked around wildly, searching for a way out, but no one met her eyes. I swear, I didn't know there were cameras. Don't think, Madison," I interrupted softly. "You've done enough of that. Let the truth do the rest." Her mouth quivered, her fingers clenching together so tightly her nails drew blood. In that moment, I saw it, the recognition, the collapse, the slow sinking of someone who finally understood that the game was over. I leaned back in my chair, the tension slipping from my shoulders, not from relief, but from certainty. I'd lived long enough to know that justice doesn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes it only needs a nod and a camera. Madison's eyes met mine, searching for mercy. I offered none. The police lights washed over my face, then hers, two reflections of the same truth, one calm, one broken. That was the moment the shift was complete. Power moved like a blade of light between us, clean, sharp, final. The hunter had become the hunted. The police sealed off the mansion within minutes after the ambulance left. I sat quietly on the sofa, my hands clasped together, watching the red and blue lights flicker against the walls. The air smelled of fear, thick, metallic, and final. Ethan was too stunned to speak, while Madison trembled, her tears smudging the streaks of expensive mascara. She tried to cling to her husband's hand, but Ethan only looked at her as if trying to decipher a language he had never heard before. One of the officers approached, tall and calm-voiced, asking me a few routine questions. I answered concisely, then said, "I have a security camera in the dining room. You can check it." Madison froze, her eyes widening, before she bowed her head, pretending to sob. But I saw it, that flash of raw terror beneath her act, the fear of someone who knows the game is already over. When the footage played, the entire room fell silent. The wide-angle shot clearly showed Madison dropping a small tablet into the champagne glass in front of me. No one breathed. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. She cried out, "I didn't mean to. I didn't know what it would do." But her words sounded thin, desperate, like the final breath of a cornered animal. Ethan stepped back, his face pale, his eyes filled with disbelief. I looked at my son and saw the moment he realized the woman he trusted most had betrayed our family in a way beyond redemption. I said nothing, only placed a hand on his shoulder, gentle but final, like closing a book that should never be reopened. The toxicology report came quickly. The tablet contained cyanide, a poison that kills in less than 2 minutes. She intended to kill her mother-in-law to secure the inheritance early, the officer stated, voice as cold as steel. I didn't react. I had known that long before tonight. The difference now was that the world knew it too. Madison began to unravel, laughing and sobbing all at once. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," she said through tears. "I just wanted things to be easier." I looked at her, calm, detached, the way one looks at a child who has broken something precious and irreplaceable. "You wanted easy, Madison," I said quietly. "Life doesn't hand out ease. Everything has a price." A female officer stepped forward and fastened the handcuffs. The sharp click of metal echoed in the room like punctuation at the end of a confession. Ethan turned away. I didn't move. The door closed behind them, and for a moment, time stood still. Only the sound of the ocean outside remained slow, deep like the heartbeat of truth itself. I rose and walked toward the window. Outside, the flashing lights painted the sea with streaks of red and blue. I thought of Carol Loud, vain Carol, who surely never imagined she would die at her daughter's retirement celebration. A cruel ending, yes, but a precise one. When you dig a hole for someone else, make sure you're not standing in it. I whispered the words softly to myself, my voice steady and clear. I didn't feel joy or triumph. What I felt was a strange stillness, the quiet after the storm, the echo left behind when greed and stupidity collide. Outside, the waves kept crashing, the sea kept roaring, and I knew the world would never run out of people eager to dig their own graves. The next morning, Malibu was no longer the paradise it had been the night before. Sunlight slipped through a thin veil of fog, touching the wet sand, and my entire mansion lay under a heavy kind of quiet. The news had spread all night. Headlines screamed, photos were snapped, rumors grew wild. But I didn't read a single word. I didn't have to. I had already seen everything with my own eyes. Madison was arrested before dawn. When the police took her away, her blonde hair was tangled, one heel of her shoe broken. I stood on the steps, watching her look back at me, panic and hatred blending in her eyes. But what I saw wasn't pity, it was arithmetic. She had walked into a game, never realizing she was never the player, only the piece. Ethan collapsed into a chair, head buried in his hands, silent. He looked at me as if searching for 1,000 answers, but none came out. I knew the pain. The hardest part for a man isn't losing the woman he loves, it's realizing he never truly knew her. I looked at my son, not cold, but not warm either. I had warned him. I had seen what he refused to see. Now, all I could say, my voice low and worn, was, "Don't blame anyone, Ethan. We all pay for what we choose not to believe." He didn't reply. He just stayed there, quiet and broken. I stepped outside to the balcony where the sea wind carried the taste of salt and grief. The sunrise spread across the water like a golden wound. I wasn't proud and I wasn't relieved. I only felt empty. Winning doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it's just the silence after a storm, when you stand among the ruins and realize there's no one left who can betray you. I had won, yes, but there were no flowers, no toasts, only a cold, hollow stillness settling inside my chest. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Madison's attorney. Pages full of pleading excuses and rehearsed remorse. She wrote about love, about fear, about the pressure I could never understand. I read it line by line, not out of sympathy, but to see her face one last time through her words. It was still the same lies wrapped in tears. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent back a thin envelope containing a check for $100 and a handwritten note. "Your share of the Hayes estate. Spend it wisely." I didn't need to say more. That single sentence was enough for her to understand that life, like business, is precise mathematics. Greed is addition, betrayal is subtraction, and justice will always balance the equation. That evening, I went down to the beach, bringing the untouched bottle of champagne from the party. I poured it into a glass, watching the bubbles rise and burst. Each tiny pop was a whisper, reminding me that everything eventually dissolves, leaving only truth behind. I raised the glass not to celebrate, not to mourn, but to bury a chapter of my life. The sunset burned red across the ocean, its light flickering against my skin like dying embers. I thought of Madison, her terrified eyes, her late tears. Perhaps at 28, she truly believed beauty and cunning could outsmart the world. But life isn't a short game, and I've always known when to make the last move. I set the glass down, watching the wind scatter the sand. The sea never judges. It simply swallows everything, sins, lies, and memories alike. When night came, the house returned to its calm, as if nothing had ever happened. I sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the floorboards. Maybe no one really wins in this world. There are only those who know when to stop and those who never learn how. I closed my eyes slowly and drew in a deep breath. The air still carried the scent of wine, flowers, and something faintly like freedom. I had survived again, but this time without negotiation, without running, without sacrifice. I simply stood still and let justice arrive. Outside, the waves rolled steadily, whispering of years gone by, and somewhere within their rhythm, I heard something close to peace. The evening in Malibu was quiet. The sea breeze slipped through the white curtains, carrying a faint scent of salt that settled gently around the room. My house felt heavier with silence than it had in years. Only the sound of the waves outside and the soft clink of the champagne glass in my hand filled the space. Under the pale moonlight, the bubbles caught the light like tiny breaths, steady, deliberate, alive. I leaned back in my chair, the silk shawl resting loosely over my shoulders, my eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Out there, every wave carried the shape of a memory, and tonight, the memories were endless. Since it all ended, this house had felt too large, too hollow. Madison was in prison. Ethan had left, saying he needed time to think. But I didn't need time. What I needed was silence. Not silence to rest, but silence to listen, to hear myself again. After decades of surviving in the world of business, I thought I had known every kind of betrayal, but nothing compares to the kind that comes from within your own home. I have lived long enough to understand that family doesn't make you immune to greed. When money becomes the only language people speak, words like love lose their meaning. Outside, the moonlight washed over the ocean, silver and cold. I took a sip of champagne, letting the taste linger on my tongue, bitter and sweet at once. The taste of truth. On the table lay the evening paper, its front page showing Madison in her prison uniform, her once perfect face drained of charm. The headline read, "Hayes' daughter-in-law sentenced for attempted murder." The papers called it a tragedy, but I didn't see tragedy. I saw the result of a calculation. She made her move, I made mine, and the numbers balanced out. They call it tragedy. I call it mathematics. Everything had simply returned to its rightful place, like figures on a ledger aligning after a long audit. Ethan never understood that. My son saw only loss, a mother against a wife, a broken life between two women he loved. But he forgot one truth. I never chose the battle, only survival. In every war, the survivor is the one who earns the right to tell the story. I looked out at the ocean again, the moon spreading a silver path across the waves. They say age makes you weaker. I think it just makes you less stupid. The words came to me naturally like a quiet confession. At 65, my body may have slowed, but my mind had never been sharper. Foolishness doesn't come with age. It comes with believing kindness can save everyone. I set the glass down, the cool stem pressing against my fingertips. In the mirror nearby, I caught a glimpse of myself, a dark-skinned woman with steady eyes and a smile as thin as a blade. It wasn't the smile of triumph, but of endurance, the smile of someone who stayed standing when the storm was over. A faint smile, quiet but absolute. Stepping onto the balcony, I let the wind brush through my hair, carrying the scent of sea and orchids from the garden below. The city of Malibu stretched out before me, the lights like low-hanging stars. The world had gone still again, but I knew this piece wasn't an ending. It was a pause between chapters. By morning, the headlines would fade, the gossip would quiet, and someone else's scandal would replace mine. But for me, tonight was the period at the end of a long sentence, not of guilt or revenge, but of closure. Clean, precise, without blood, without chaos, only truth and consequence. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm of the waves and my heartbeat blending into the ocean's breath. In that moment, I understood I didn't need forgiveness. I didn't need to be understood. I had lived my life by my own rules, and tonight was no exception. The champagne glass was still half full, the moon was still shining, and I, Victoria Hayes, was still here in the calm after the storm. The night in Malibu was so quiet I could hear the ocean breathing. The waves rolled against the shore like a slow, steady heartbeat, just like mine, calm after a long storm. Moonlight poured over the white tiles of the balcony, reflected in the champagne glass in my hand, glowing with a soft golden hue, warm but cold. The scent of salt in the air mingled with the faint aroma of wine, filling me with a sense of peace and power at the same time. I thought of Madison, of her eyes when the handcuffs closed around her wrists. They widened, filled with panic, then emptied out completely. I didn't feel joy nor pity. I only felt that everything had unfolded exactly as I had calculated. People call it karma. I call it consequence. Ethan hasn't visited me since the trial ended. I understand. He's trapped between two women he once believed loved him, both a wife and a mother. Madison planted a different story in his mind, one where she was the victim. But when the security footage played, when every frame revealed her hand, her furtive glance, the small tablet slipping into the champagne, truth no longer needed words. In the weeks that followed, the media exploded. Headlines screamed everywhere. Daughter-in-law's failed murder at millionaire's retirement party, poison at the Malibu mansion. I didn't read them. I didn't give interviews. I simply sent my lawyer to handle what needed to be done, closing the trust, securing every asset. Madison would never touch a single dollar of mine or Ethan's ever again. A few days ago, I mailed her a check for $100. A small amount, but enough to carry the message. Your share of the Hayes estate. Spend it wisely. My hand didn't tremble when I wrote it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was at peace, the kind of peace that comes when you've done what's right, even if that rightness feels like cruelty. On the table beside me sits a small photo frame, Ethan and I on the day of his graduation. His face then was still unmarked by life, bright and gentle. I touched the glass and smiled. He'll need time. Truth always teaches, even when it hurts, and the lesson is this: kindness means nothing without the intelligence to protect it. I tilted my head toward the night sky, black, vast, scattered with cold stars. I remembered everything: the sound of glasses clinking, Madison's eyes, Carol collapsing, the police radio crackling. All of it came together like the rhythm of a life built on clarity. I've lived my whole life within calculations, and that never made me cruel, only precise. Never underestimate a woman who has built an empire. When she's silent, it's not fear, it's calculation. I heard that line again in my mind like an old song. It isn't arrogance, it's truth. Some people take revenge through rage. I've always preferred silence. Silence holds a power that shouting never will. I took a sip of champagne. The taste was bitter, sharp, and sweet all at once, like my life. Offshore, the wind picked up, tossing the loose strands of silver in my hair. I smiled faintly, not from happiness, but from recognition. I was still here, still standing, still the author of my own story. They say age makes you weaker. I think it just makes you less foolish. And if anyone asked whether I regret how things ended, I would say no. I don't regret surviving. I don't regret saving myself from the hands that meant to destroy me. That night, I sat alone for a long time, listening to the waves, finishing the last of my drink. When the glass was empty, I set it down and watched the moonlight shimmer through it. In that quiet moment, I realized something. Justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes the moment you can look at the truth and say, I'm still here. And I knew until my very last breath, I would always be the one writing my own ending.